Hello, Bobby Torres of Frightbox Recording here. So the question is, should you be recording DI tracks, clean DI tracks, with your heavy guitars when recording your music? And also, how much headroom should you be leaving on your master bus or master fader when mixing or mastering your music? Welcome to Viewer Questions Answered, episode 27. Now, before we begin, hello, Bobby Torres from the future here. I just want to apologize for the strange microphone noise that you might hear throughout this video. I don't know what was causing it. Maybe it was my jacket brushing up against the lav mic. But anyway, enjoy the video. I just want to let you know that if you're struggling with your guitar tone and you're relying on amp sims, the truth is that most of the source tone comes from using a solid impulse response. And because of this, I'm offering you for absolutely free my IR Octapack. In the IR pack, you get 8 impulse responses, 2 SM57s, 2 SM81s, 2 Sennheiser E609s, as well as 2 Electro Voice RE16s. 8 solid impulse responses that you could drop right into your amp sim, so you could dial in a killer heavy guitar tone with absolute ease and without having to mess with endless EQ. Again, the IR pack is completely free. Just click the link below and it's all yours. So with that out of the way, let's jump into this excellent group of questions submitted by my loyal subscribers. And question number 1 comes from Mr. Hyam. I have 2 condenser microphones connected to my Behringer mixer and my USB sound card. What can I do with Reaper if I want to make a more detailed recording, just as if I were using multiple microphones on my drums? I've recorded it, but I can't have that detailed sound. Is the problem my room or soundproofing? And I'm using 2 different snare drums, steel and wood. And 2, what should I do if I want to make a stereo recording with a pair of microphones? How do I set the track and input in Reaper? I hope you can answer my email and help me. Thank you. Okay, well, Hyam, this is an excellent question, and I'm going to be 100% honest with you. If you're just sticking 2 condenser mics over your entire drum set, unfortunately, you're never gonna achieve that album quality drum sound. You can achieve great demo sounding drums, and short of just going in there and recording your overheads and spending tons of time laying in drum samples, you'll never achieve that album quality drum sound. The good news is that you can get a simple 8-channel interface for dirt cheap these days. I know Behringer makes one that I think is around $200 that I've heard amazing recordings done with that simple 8-channel interface. And again, I think it's around $200 or $250, 8 channels, and 8 channels are more than enough to record a full drum set. Because if you want that album quality drum sound, you need to multi-track your drums. Now, as far as it being your room's fault, it is definitely not your room's fault. The thing is, you're trying to achieve that sound that you have in your head and that you want to hear, like I said, a pro quality drum mix from a professional album with just 2 microphones. And those guys are using, 8 microphones at the minimum. Now, I'm not saying to not record at all, just expect it to sound more like a demo. And as far as, getting that sound, the 2 stereo overheads into your DAW, it's very simple. In Reaper, just choose a stereo input. And if your interface only has 2 inputs, you can select channels 1 and 2 as your main input source, and you're good to go. Just don't clip on the way in. And again, you are good to go. So hi, I'm just being honest, and I don't want you to waste your time. So in my opinion, just save up a little for an 8-channel interface and a cheap drum mic kit like the Samson drum mics or the cheaper Shure drum mics, and then you can get to recording some album quality drum tracks once you build up your skill level. Excellent question. All right, and question number 2 comes from Mr. Brian. Hi, Bobby. I saw your latest viewer comments video. I'm new to opening my studio services to the public. I'd love to see the PDF that you're sending to bands and artists if you don't mind. One question on that. A lot of what I do is remote mixing and some recording mixed in. This is mostly because I live in a remote town about an hour outside of the small city close by. Do you have a format you sent to someone who might only be looking for mixing mastering services as well? Thanks so much, Brian. Okay, well, Brian, I love this question. And yes, I do have a PDF that I send to all bands that inquire about mixing and mastering. And I'm pretty sure I sent you that PDF. And by the way, anyone who's watching who wants a copy of that PDF, just email me and I'll be happy to send it to you. But I just want to mention one important thing when it comes to sending out PDFs to bands and just working with clients in general. It's important to be clear about guidelines and the way that you work right up front. For example, 2 key things here when it comes to dealing with mixing clients. Number 1, I only allow for 3 revisions. After we have to tweak the mix more than 3 times, I charge an additional $75 per revision. If you implement this, you'll be amazed how quickly bands won't haunt you with endless revisions, because there are people out there that will tweak a mix literally for years. And you want to avoid that if you want to be successful as a mixing engineer. And tip number 2 is to send out a detailed PDF on file preparation, because I'm not going to lie. When I mix clients, I would say that 50 to 70% of the time, I am not exaggerating, I'm dealing with improperly labeled files, unedited files, and only 30 to 40% of the time I'm spent actually mixing. And the best way to minimize this is right up front to send a PDF on detailed file prep instructions. For some reason, people really just have problems prepping files. It really comes down to organization. I am not a neat or organized person by nature, but I have to be in order to run a successful business producing and recording and mixing metal. Now, Brian has a second question, which I thought was another good question, and it is this. How often do you change the house kit's heads in your studio? Is it every session, every week, every song, or some other frequency? Thank you again so much for taking the time. Okay, well, Brian, this is a great question. Now, in my studio, I have a house kit that most of the bands use when they come in to record. And if a drummer does not want to use my house kit, I ensure and make sure that he has a decent drum set with fresh heads on it, because you never know what people are going to bring into the studio. Now, as far as the drum heads on my own drum set, generally, I'll change the actual heads on the toms and snare once every 2 to 3 months, depending on how beat up they are. If they're looking really mashed potato-like after the end of 1 month, then I will just replace it at that point. I don't want my artists recording on beat up drum heads. It's very important to change them when they're beat up. But for the most part, it's usually every 2 to 3 months. Now for the kick drum, you can get away with going a little longer. Me, I change my kick drum head about once every 6 months to maybe 9 months. That's because kick drum heads can take a lot more abuse. And the style of music I record, the drummers are rarely slamming onto kick drums. Now, if you're recording a lot of rock bands where it's simpler music and the drummers really hit hard, then maybe every 4 months if you see a lot of dimples in the batter side head. But again, you could pretty much get away with changing your kick drum head every 6 months to a year. Now, one other thing I want to mention is that as far as the resonant head is concerned, meaning the head that's on the bottom of your toms and on the outside of your kick, you could get away with having them for years. I change my resonant heads usually once every 2, maybe 3 years. Now, they can become beat up if you're tapping your drums looking for notes or pitches, and you do that a lot. You will end up with dimples on the resonant side head of your drum. But honestly, it's not going to affect your drum sound much. It mainly comes down to the treatment and how well you maintain your top head. Brian, excellent question. Okay, now this next comment is more of a tale of warning than a question, but I think it's important to hear because I see this happen all of the time. And it comes from Deadeye8593. In the past, I've only just recorded my tube amp live, but that recently bit me in the ass pretty hard. I was in the middle of recording an album and found myself having to move to a different state. So now I have all of these sessions that are glorified pre-production demos and have to start all over. If I would have just tracked a DI alongside my live amp tones, none of this would be a problem. I have a good DI box and I'm currently looking into reamp boxes to get one and change my tracking habits. Sucks I had to learn the hard way, but lesson learned. Okay, I'm so glad that he wrote this. Now, this is such an important lesson to learn, and for anyone who's watching, if you are not tracking DIs with your tube amps or your amp sim, let's say you're using like an Axe Effects and you're going straight into your interface, I highly recommend to always track a clean DI with your heavy guitar tracks. Now, to be very clear, if you're just recording your guitar straight into your interface using a plugin, that is tracking DI, so you don't have to worry about it. But if you're old school and you're tracking a tube amp, I see this all the time where bands will hit me up wanting me to mix their EP or album, and they'll send me the files and the guitar tones are terrible, and I'll say to them, where are the DIs? So I can reamp them or fix the tone, and they say, oh, well, we didn't track DIs. And honestly, I don't even take the projects because you cannot fix a bad guitar tone with EQ. You really honestly can't. A solid guitar tone at the source is absolutely crucial to any heavy production or rock production. Now, heavy music producers have been recording DIs for well over 2 decades now. It's standard practice, and you can pick up any dirt cheap DI box. It'll naturally split your signals so you can record the clean DI and your amp track, and you can always reamp later or have a professional reamp your tone if the tone isn't working in your production. You don't want to end up like Mr. Deadeye and spend all this time tracking all the guitars for your album only to realize that you have to re-record everything. And also, sometimes tube amps break. I can't tell you the amount of times that I'm working with a band in a bigger studio and somebody kicks a microphone or a tube amp goes down or a mic pre goes down, and all of a sudden the tone is different. And luckily, because I have experience, I recorded a DI and I could reamp all the performances later, so there's a nice consistent tone throughout the album. Because as you know, a consistent guitar tone across a metal album is crucial. So word of warning, if you're not doing it, always record DI tracks. This right here that Mr. Deadite wrote in was a real world example of why you should always do so. Okay, and our final question here is an excellent one, and it comes from Mr. Tashi. Hello, Bobby. I have read that there should be at least 6 dB of headroom, but when I try for that, my overall mix is very low. I bring up the output volume on my interface so that it can be heard. But with the same output volume on an AI, other songs seem so loud. I am stuck. How can it be fixed? Thanks and Happy New Year, Tashi. Okay, well, Tashi, I'm so glad you wrote this in because I don't know where this 6 dB thing came from. Two things here. Very simple. If you're just mixing your music and you're going to send it to a mastering engineer, or you're going to master your music further down the road, as long as you're not clipping and no peaks are exceeding 0 dB on your master bus, you're good. You don't need a magical amount of headroom. That really makes no sense. Again, the idea is to just not clip digitally, which unfortunately so many people do because they're not paying attention to their master bus, which is the opposite of what you're mentioning. The other thing I want to mention is that if you're leaving 6 dB of headroom and you're comparing your mix to mastered productions, what you're describing is completely normal. Your mix is going to be super quiet because most modern masters are really tightly compressed and limited, and so much of the average level is hanging up close to 0 dB, which is why these mixes sound so loud. And I should say why these masters sound so loud. So keep that in mind when you're comparing your mix to the pro mixes. Theirs are already mastered, and it's why they're so loud. Now, when it comes to this business of 6 dB of headroom on your master bus, it makes zero sense. I would say this, it is kind of a good rule to follow because it keeps you careful from clipping, but you're not gonna magically have a better or a louder mix by having more headroom. If anything, your mix is gonna be quieter, but that's what mastering is for. So Tashi, hopefully this makes sense, and keep me posted on your future productions. So I would just like to shout out and thank everyone for this excellent group of questions. And if you have sent a question and I haven't gotten to it yet, just be patient. I'll definitely get to it within one of these videos in this series. And if you found this video helpful, like, comment, subscribe, and share. And do not forget to click the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I upload more weekly videos on all things metal and rock production. If you're interested in some Frightbox swag, I've got t-shirts, mugs, and a ton of other cool stuff on the way. There's a link below to the Frightbox merch store in this video's description. Again, if you're struggling with your guitar tone and you're using amp sims, make your life easier and just use a decent impulse response. And again, you can download my impulse response Octapack for absolutely free. 8 solid impulse responses neatly packaged together, all yours for free. There's a link below in this video's description. And until next time, happy mixing.